I think it's important to identify what it is that we're doing in this world and why. I call it the 5 core human needs. So, from my observation, the 5 core needs of a human being are, and not necessarily in this order, but to be seen. And I defined to be seen already as that people see your true nature, your true core personality, your essence, as opposed to the false personality or the conditioned personality that we present to the world. They see us beyond our talents, beyond our flaws, beyond our mistakes, our strengths and our weaknesses. They see who we are. And then we are accepted and perhaps even cared for and perhaps even loved. But to be seen is a necessary experience, I think a daily experience. Otherwise, we feel alienated and we feel afraid to show ourselves. So, as I've mentioned already, some of us have this extreme desire to be seen, yet we hide as much as possible, saying, "Come find me. Pry open this door and look at me. What's wrong with you?" This is something we do. So that's number one, to be seen. Number two is to be loved, of course, and to love. To be loved and to love. This includes family, children, romantic partner, community also, and humanity in general. To have love in our life is extremely important and can make life seem to have meaning, whereas sometimes it doesn't if we don't feel love. Number three is that our existence matters, which you could say could be in the category of love, but perhaps it's slightly different. That our existence matters, that people would notice if we weren't here, and they would notice if we are here. Some people feel like if I died tomorrow, no one would notice, no one would care. One person, my mother would come to my funeral. That's it. The world would go on as if I never existed. And this actually really plagues people. It's interesting. Genghis Khan, you probably heard of him. Many of us are related to him. It's true. If you've ever read anything about genetics, he had more progeny than anybody on earth, and most people are related to him. He was extraordinarily brutal, and he was also a genius. I assume he was some sort of psychopath or sociopath. And the thing that upset him the most in the world was being forgotten. He said something like, I'm not afraid of anything or anyone, any army, nobody, no beast. The thing I'm afraid of is time, because I know that within 2 generations, I will be forgotten. Everything I've done will be forgotten. So this plagued someone who had the most power that anybody up to that point had ever had in the world. So we need to know our existence matters, hopefully not as badly as him, but our existence matters, meaning parenthood, healing. Like, for example, if you're a healer or a teacher, you can get a sense that your existence matters because you see yourself making a difference. Like many of you have professions like this. Being in service, just in simple service, sometimes can make us feel this way. In other words, you might say, I'm not healing anybody, but I know that I made a difference today by helping people. Protecting others. Soldiers have a great sense of meaning by being the protectors. Police officers, firefighters have this tremendous sense of protection. Parents also, but to a stronger degree, I think people who save lives or are prepared to and trained to. Discovery also. People will feel a great meaning that their existence matters if they discover something. Research scientists alone in a room for 50 years suddenly come up with something that changes the course of history. And therefore they feel like they matter. So that's 1, 2, and 3 so far: to be seen, to love and be loved, and that our existence matters. Number 4 would be a spiritual life or a spiritual connection. For some, this takes the form of religion, others not religion, but spirituality, some both. And this is where we go into the big questions of life of what is this existence? Why is there this existence? How do I fit into it? Is there existence beyond the body? Are there several existences beyond the body or only one? As you know, some philosophies believe we have reincarnation while others do not. To feel like our existence is not pointless, ultimately, to feel like it has meaning and that we are connected into some sort of matrix that is benevolent, loving, and intelligent is extremely important. Others don't even think about it, they just think, let's go get a pint in the evening. And others have a few pints and then start asking these questions. Well, wait a second. I come in here every night and have a pint. Why am I doing this? What does it all mean? And when I spoke about this at the Inner Peace Conference in Amsterdam last year, I was talking about how most human beings, especially those who have a spiritual path, they have some experience in their life that causes this to occur. In other words, it's not necessarily intellectuality that drives them towards spirituality. It's actually an experience. And then experience becomes knowledge. And this drives them or us toward a quest of learning more. And these things are very hard to quantify. And there are people who hallucinate, and there are people who are delusional, but that's not the majority of people, I think. And most people have some experience in their life which can't be quantified, which could be called a spiritual experience or at least extra sensory experience. So an example I like to give is this. I know a woman who's very practical, and before this occurrence was not particularly interested in spirituality at all. But what caused her to start thinking about these things is on one morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, she was just about to wake up at her usual time. She lived on the East Coast of the United States. The rest of her family lived in Los Angeles. And she bolts up in bed and says, earthquake. There's an earthquake in Los Angeles. Turns on the TV. There was a huge earthquake in Los Angeles. How did she know that? Why did that happen? Was that a fluke? You could say it was, except that happened to thousands of people. And that happens every time there's some big catastrophe like that. People will bolt up at night. For example, let's say you have a grandparent that's perfectly healthy. And you bolt up at night and you say, Grandpa. 3 seconds later, your phone rings. Someone calls you to tell you Grandpa just passed 10 minutes ago. So I asked this group of 500 people, and I said, raise your hand if at some point in your life, even if it was only once, you had some kind of experience like this. And almost everybody raised their hand. And a lot of people raised their hand with tears streaming down their face. And my point is this. A scientist would say we have to quantify this, which is reasonable. I'm not criticizing science. But I say, how do you quantify that? Do we put a monitor in everybody's room for the whole lifetime? And then a bright psychiatrist would then say, okay, but this doesn't necessarily mean that there's a God. They could say, but it could mean that we have, as Carl Jung said, this collective unconscious, where we're all connected like a hive consciousness, where we can communicate across vast geographical locations. So then you could debate on that. It's like, could you have a collective unconscious without a God, without, what's the word I'm looking for, a cosmology? It's quite interesting. And lastly, number 5, and I would say this one many people do without in life, is meaningful work. It kind of ties into does our existence matter? If we've acquired the first 4, the next thing people really want, say, okay, I have everything, but I really would like my work not just to sustain me and my family, but I would like it to mean something. I want work that is meaningful. Most of you know that I do meet sometimes with corporate people under different scenarios. This is not the main thrust of my work, but I do this. And I can think of one company in particular, a company with $1 trillion budget. And I met with the top 12 executives one at a time. They would close the door, and I was like their father confessor. They wanted to talk to somebody so badly. And 11 of the 12 of them said the same thing, more or less. They said, I have everything I need now. I have all the money I need. I have power. I even have prestige. I'm at the top office, and I think about jumping out the window. And what I'd really like to do is quit this company and start a small company that helps people, because I have everything in my life except meaning. I'll never forget that. And so the majority of them felt the same way. These are the 5 topics that keep coming up as I deal with people one-on-one. I think it's really interesting to keep track of these as you have conversations with people and to identify which one of these topics they're revealing about themselves, what is missing. And going back to the little joke I made at the beginning of this talk, that often our hindrance to achieving these things is we get in our own way. The biggest terrorist in our life is looking at us in the mirror every morning, the one who sabotages all the goodness that we could be doing. And that doesn't mean that therefore we should feel shame about that. I'm certainly not implying that whatsoever, but it's actually good news. That means we have some possibility of change. So it really should be looked at as good news. We can change these things, and we can help others as they attempt to change these things. So one of the first actions to take is, of course, to be able to reveal ourselves, which means we choose voluntarily to be vulnerable. There are 2 types of vulnerability. One is involuntary vulnerability. That's when something happens that's totally outside your control, such as the pandemic. You and I had nothing to do with the cause of this. And if your company goes out of business and you're laid off and you weren't in a position of power in that company, that had nothing to do with you. Or someone that you love becomes ill. That affects you very deeply, but you didn't cause it. Then there's voluntary vulnerability. Now, there's actually a term for voluntary vulnerability in the English language, which we call courage. Courage. We mostly use courage for a heroic act in the physical realm, but where we actually experience it the most is in the emotional realm, or lack of. And that means we have to be courageous to reveal who we are, including things that we're embarrassed about or ashamed of. And when we were able to do this, as you saw yesterday, we really connect. That's when the connection really begins. When you meet someone at a party and you say, how many brothers and sisters do you have? Where are you from? This doesn't connect you to that person. It's just data. But most of us didn't know each other 3 days ago, 4 days ago. And now you've connected. All of you have connected to a certain extent to many of the people in this little room we have now. So I hope that we continue to learn to connect in this way, because it's the deepest form of connection, and it helps us to feel seen, that our existence matters, and maybe even somewhat loved. And maybe you even felt your heart crack open a bit, and a feeling of a kind of a compassionate love toward others in this group as they revealed their deepest pain. I know I did. I also have to say that whenever I lead one of these circles and people really reveal their deepest truth, they become more beautiful. Before your eyes, you see the person in their most essential beauty. They even look different physically. Their facial expression, like all the tension, the hardness, it's all melted away. And it's astonishing how beautiful people can become as they take the armor off. So it's the thing we fear the most. That's the irony of it all. It's the thing we fear the most. Oh my God, what if I really showed myself? The world will end. I'll be run out of town. And instead, people come toward you.